Today we are looking at a case from the first half of the 19th century. So sit back as we go to France. Françoise Sébastiani was born on the 14th of April 1807 in Constantinople. Her father was Horace François Bastien Sébastiani, who was a French soldier, diplomat and politician, who at the time of Francoise's birth was serving overseas as a naval minister for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Tragically, her mother, named Antoinette Jeanne, died while giving birth to her. Francoise's father was part of the French aristocracy. He was wealthy and well connected and made sure his daughter received a good education. She was taught by highly recommended governesses, and she learnt all the social graces befitting a young lady in the early 19th century. On the 18th of October 1824, when Francoise was 17 years old, she married Charles Loire Theobald. He was 2 years older than his bride and the eldest son of Charles Reynard Loire Felix, the 4th Duke of Praslin. Although an aristocratic match of two very wealthy families, Francoise and Charles seemed to be very much in love. Like most couples at the time, they soon started a family. Charles knew that he would one day become the Duke and was keen that his wife give him a son. Over the next 15 years, Francoise gave birth to 10 children, of which 9 survived. Her years of childbirth, however, took a toll on her, and now 32 years old, she no longer felt like the beautiful angelic girl she once was. She was overweight, and the first wrinkles had appeared on her face. But she was a loyal and devoted wife, who was still very much in love with her husband. Charles, however, was becoming more distant, and as time passed, he seemed to pay her less and less attention. In an attempt to win back his affections, she wrote him letters and love notes, which she would instruct one of her servants to take to him, a somewhat strange occurrence, as the family all lived in the same house. Unfortunately, these seemed to have little effect, and the relationship between Francoise and Charles didn't improve. It just continued to meander along. Francoise also kept a detailed diary, and her writing showed how much in love she was with her husband and how she longed for them to be like they were when they first married. Charles, however, ignored his wife's letters. He just went about his day in a calm and quiet way. He knew his position was one of responsibility and focused on his work. He didn't consider that his wife's frequent letters warranted a reply. On June the 28th, 1841, Charles's father died, and he became the 5th Duke of Praslin, and Francoise became the Duchess. Determined to make an impression on the French elite, Charles established himself as one of the leading figures in the French court, which was under the reign of Louis-Philippe I. He immediately set about restoring the family home, which was a very impressive Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte in Massy, about 35 miles southeast of Paris. In the same year, a new governess was hired, named Henriette de Lucy. Concerned with his wife's emotional outbursts, he insisted that Francoise sign a document agreeing that she would not see her children unless someone else was present. When the new governess arrived, the family were living at their impressive house in Paris, and Mademoiselle de Lucy felt privileged to be working in the house for such a distinguished French family. She was a very intelligent young lady, but had experienced a difficult upbringing due to the fact that she was an illegitimate child. This carried great social stigma in 19th century France. Then, when she was still very young, her mother tragically died, and it was left to her grandfather to support her. But she was well educated and very artistic, and possessed a polite and charming demeanour, which always seemed to leave a favourable impression on those who met her. During the next few years, the very pretty young governess taught the family's daughters and youngest children, and they all seemed to adore her. Francoise, however, had started to resent Mademoiselle Henriette de Lucy. In April 1845, Charles became a member of the Department of Seine-et-Marne and received the very distinguished title of Peer of France. This was a great honour, as it was only ever bestowed upon a small number of noble individuals. The Duke was spending more time away from home and paid even less attention to his wife. And by 1847, rumours surfaced in Paris that the Duke and his children's governess were lovers. Mademoiselle de Lucy had now been working for the family for 6 years, and although popular with the children, the rest of the staff considered her too strict and too controlling, and had never warmed to her. Francoise told the Duke that he must dismiss the governess, or she would divorce him. At the time, divorce was not socially acceptable, especially in the elite social circles that the Duke and Duchess moved in. It would also mean that their daughters would find it more difficult to marry into a high-status family. The Duke, however, refused to dismiss her. By June 1847, the Duchess had had enough of all the gossip and rumour about her husband and the governess. Whenever she went out in public, she would notice the elegantly dressed women whisper to one another, and she felt that she was the subject of many afternoon conversations between the distinguished Parisian ladies. So feeling unloved and unwanted, Francoise dismissed the governess. Henriette was distraught at being discharged from her duties, and when the Duke found out what his wife had done, he was extremely angry. Charles, however, was a respected public figure, and although his relationship with his wife had deteriorated, he needed to keep up the appearance of a united aristocratic couple. On the 17th of August 1847, the Duke and Duchess were returning to their house in Paris. Their plan was to stay in Paris before moving on for a vacation in the seaside town of Dieppe. The couple's rooms were located on the ground floor and separated by an antechamber that opened onto a flight of stairs. There was also a little room which connected the Duke and Duchess's bedrooms. The servants all slept on the upper floors. At about 4:30 in the morning, the Duchess rang the bell, signalling that she required assistance. Her chambermaid, named Madame Leclerc, got up and hurried to see what her mistress required. When she arrived, however, the door was locked. This was strange, as the door was never locked. The maid knocked and quietly tried to ask what it was the Duchess needed, but no one answered. She thought that she could hear faint cries and the sound of footsteps coming from the room. Madame Leclerc rushed for assistance, and as she shouted for help, the rest of the staff were awoken and went downstairs to see what all the fuss was about. Finally, the Duke's valet led them to the door of the anteroom, which connected to the Duke and Duchess's bedrooms. The room was completely dark, but they could hear the faint whimpers of the Duchess. By candlelight, they could make out the shape of a person. When more servants arrived with lanterns, they saw the Duchess lying on the floor, and over her was her husband, the Duke. He was distraught and covered in blood. As the servants attended Francoise, they saw that her nightclothes were red with blood, and she had several deep wounds, including one on her throat. The footman ran for help, and 2 doctors quickly arrived. They looked at the Duchess, but the injuries she had sustained were too severe, and 2 hours after being discovered by her maid, the Duchess de Praslin died. Soon after the doctors entered the house, the police also arrived, and on inspecting the room, the chief inspector immediately told his officers that this was not the work of a professional thief or murderer, as it was so clumsily done. It was the work of a gentleman. The police followed a trail of blood that led from the Duchess's room to the Duke's room. They also found a loaded pistol and noted that the butt had fragments of flesh embedded in it. Hidden in the Duke's room was a blood-stained dagger handle, and in the fireplace was a half-burnt handkerchief and some paper. When the inspector asked the Duke to empty his pockets, there were several pieces of blood-stained cord that were exactly the same as the bell cord in the Duchess's bedroom. The Duke also had bruises and scratches on his arms and face. When questioned by the inspector, Charles claimed that he was suddenly awoken by strange noises coming from his wife's bedroom. He got out of bed and started to make his way to the room, but decided to return to his own room so he could fetch his pistol. When he got to Francoise's bedroom, he could only hear her faint cries and called out her name. He then lit a candle and saw a man attacking his wife. He tried valiantly to defend her, which caused the noise that awoke the household and the bruises and scratches on his face. The man fled through an open window, and the Duke threw himself over his wife's body, embracing her, which is how the blood came to be on his nightshirts. Then the servants appeared. It seemed, however, no robbery had been committed, or even attempted, and the police found no evidence that anyone had forcefully entered the property. Everyone at the house was questioned by the police, but the overwhelming evidence pointed to the Duke being the person responsible for the crime. He was soon placed under house arrest and closely watched. He couldn't be taken into custody straight away because he was a French peer, and his arrest could only be arranged with the agreement of his fellow peers. When the police learnt about the Duke's alleged affair with his children's governess, Mademoiselle Henriette de Lucy, she was also arrested and placed in a cell while the investigation continued. The news of the death of the Duchess soon spread throughout Paris, and despite the Duke's insistence of his innocence, Parisians mostly considered him guilty. These were difficult times in France. The king, Louis Philippe, was viewed as a person who didn't understand the needs of French society, especially the members of the middle class, who were excluded from the political arena. He could not afford to have a scandal, especially one concerning a member of his court, and he knew that due to the unrest in the country, he would have to order the Duke's arrest. Before he could be arrested and taken to prison to await trial, Charles, the 5th Duke of Praslin, died. He had apparently swallowed a large amount of arsenic, which had resulted in him dying a week later in immense pain. His death was ruled as suicide, but whispers circulated in Paris that the king and his government had made sure that the Duke's food was sufficiently laced with poison in order to avoid a high-profile trial and the undoubted media circus that would accompany it. Mademoiselle Henriette de Lucy was kept in custody for 3 months and repeatedly questioned. The police considered that she must have had a part in the crime, but with no evidence, she was eventually released by the magistrates. Following the scandal, life in France was going to be difficult for Henriette. The people seemed to pity the poor, lonely, unloved yet devoted Duchess, and Henriette was seen as a pariah-type figure who seduced a duke. This only got worse when the French press published many of the letters that the Duchess had written to her husband during the time the governess was employed. Even though Mademoiselle Henriette de Lucy always denied any improper relationship with the Duke, she changed her name and emigrated to America. Here she prospered and became the principal of the female art school at the Cooper Union in New York. She met the Reverend Henry Fieldland and they married in 1851. She also wrote a book about her native country called Home Sketches of France. Henriette de Lucy died a distinguished and respected lady in 1874. There were rumours in France that the Duke did not die in 1847, and instead his aristocratic friends helped him fake his own death and smuggled him out of the country. Later rumours surfaced that the Duke had ended up in Nicaragua, where he met a local lady and fathered children before he died in 1882. Although there is no proof of this, there are some people in Nicaragua who claim to be descendants of Charles Theobald, the 5th Duke of Praslin. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any feedback or comments you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case.